Hi, folks. My name is J.M. Erlinson, and I'm a transformation engineering lead here at Software AG, and this is another of our ARIS tutorial series. This time, we're going to look at user administration. And user administration covers both ARIS Connect, where you're going to set up and initialize user with basic permissions, and ARIS Architect, which you'll see a little bit later, to control granular permissions. Now, one quick caveat, if you've got LDAP SSO synchronization enabled in your environment, it's possible that a lot of your users and user groups will have already come over from what exists in those systems. So some of this might not be quite as relevant, but the permissions granting is very relevant. And we'll talk about that in the second half of the video. The first half, we're going to talk about how do you use the administration menu in ARIS Connect to create new users and give them permissions. So first, I'm going to click on the top right on my name and choose administration. Now, under administration, one of the panels looks like three people sort of huddled next to each other. And of course, that's our user management area. You can see I've got a couple of users already initialized in this environment. And over here, I'm going to add a new user to the picture. I'm going to give them a name. I'm going to put this for first name and their last name, and then give them their email at email.com. And I can specify a starting password, or I can have them set their password when they get in the system for the first time. Now, once I've created this new user, there's a couple of different types of privileges I can give them. First is I can directly allocate privileges of a few different types, which we'll take a look at in a second. Alternatively, I can put them into a user group. A user group can have any number of these same privileges, but for reuse and ease of access and pulling people out of permissions groups, putting in the new ones, sometimes we'll set up user groups, in fact, almost all the time, to make it easy for you to say, hey, these are my architects, these are my designers, these are people who need access to this specific content, these are people who need, for instance, content in HR, content in finance, this sort of information. That'll factor in later when we get into the granular permissions, but at a course level, we usually use user groups to quickly assign a large number of privileges to those users. Now, those privileges fall into three different categories for a sort of course level. The first, and let's start with the middle one, license privileges. License privileges control the different modules of ARIS that a single user has access to. Now, while this does control primarily the tool sets they have access to use the platform with, it also tacitly controls the types of access they're given. For instance, a viewer, even if you have like write access to an environment, if you only have a viewer license, you can't change anything. So it does add another level of security and permissions control on certain functions in ARIS. So I'll be able to allocate, let's say this person's a viewer who has access to Aware, which is our dashboarding tool set, and the ability to use Contribution, which is our contributor license. Next, I want to give them database privileges. Which areas of content in ARIS am I allowed to see, change, version, all sorts of things? So for instance, if I were to add access privileges, now this is a course level access privilege. I want to make that very clear. There are granular access privileges, which we'll take a look at later, but I can give them no access, read comment, which allows them to access the collaboration unit, a module of this platform on any given model or object. Write, delete, which means I can remove that object from the database. Version, which is a function of creating new versions of models or objects as things change, and you want to keep a copy as an archive of how it used to be. And so it scales from the bottom to the top for a whole database. We're not actually going to do that right now. We'll do that in a more granular fashion. And lastly is functional privileges. Now, each sort of describes what they do, but here are some ones that are really important that you should be aware of. Database administrator allows you to be a system user and control everything in all databases, as well as managing and backing up and restoring databases to the environment. Those are the logical containers of information you might have. Script administrators are people who can publish, create, review different reports in ARIS. So if you're getting a domain architect to build new reports for you, this is a great way to give them that access. User administration is what you're seeing right now. However, an important caveat is user administrators can only allocate the privileges up to their permissions level, meaning your domain architects can't over-assign privileges only up to their own level. So you can give domain architects full user administration control. They can only create users that have a subset of their own permissions, as well as people like analysis publishers, which we'll talk about in a subsequent video talking about queries and analyses, or dashboard administrators that allow you to create and manage all your ARIS-aware dashboards. So I can check and manage any number of these different permissions, and those will give the person who I'm creating that access to those functional privileges. Next, what I'm going to do, now that I've created this new user in my environment, is I'm going to give them granular access permissions. And for that, I'm going to need to launch ARIS Architect, which you can find under Download Clients, or if you have the jar file, you can simply run it and call up ARIS Architect as long as you have the permissions. Now, in the ARIS Administration menu, so under ARIS Administration, you can see that when I open up any given database, I've got users and user groups as selectable elements. And if I right-click on name, for instance, the new one we made, I can choose the privileges that they're given at a granular level rather than at a coarse level. Perfect example of that is I can choose group by group within the ARIS database down to the very lowest level what someone can see and what someone can delete, what someone can write to, what someone can create new versions of. And that's very powerful. For instance, if you are simply someone who works in the financial services and you're looking at creating your 2Bs, well, sure, you get full access to that. But your as is, well, we can only read and comment to say, hey, this isn't good anymore, let's change it. I'll create or delete things in my 2B environment. We'll cover these in subsequent videos, but method filters and reports are also controlled at a user level. You can assign method filters, reports, and dashboards and give them permissions to users and user groups. And here's an example where you'd allocate method filters, a control of what you can see and access by type of object and model. You can check or uncheck those different rights for any given user or user group. And you can see how you can directly assign or have assigned passed on by your group those user permissions. And so in that way, I can very easily, A, create and manage a list of users, B, control and manage their granular permissions, all within the ARIS environment. And that's a basic primer on how you create and manage users within the ARIS system. Thanks so much for paying attention. Once again, I've been J.M. Erlinson. We're doing a series of videos on ARIS tutorials, so feel free to leave comments or contact Software AG if you have more questions about the ARIS product set or anything to do with what you saw today. Thanks so much for watching. See you soon.